Like many of my contemporaries, growing up, we never talked about the Holocaust experience. Unspoken dialogue is the substance that nurtured my very identity as a Jew. I was the bearer of a legacy that was, and in some ways still is, too difficult to articulate. For years I was complicit in the testimony of silence, sharing only echoes of my parents' pain and anger. And though somewhat theologically challenged, like my father, despite God's seeming abandonment of his chosen people, I was resolved to raise my children as committed Jews. Some questions simply have no answer. Between December 1938, about 3 weeks after Kristallnacht, and September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, almost 10,000 Jewish boys and girls hugged and kissed their parents goodbye as they boarded trains bound for England and an uncertain future. Many, if not most, would never see their parents again, nor their grandparents, nor their brothers, their sisters, nor many other relatives. Their journey to England became known as the Kindertransport, the children themselves as Kinder. Both of my parents were Kinder, and neither spoke about their experience, or indeed of their parents, siblings, of their childhood, or anything they had then thought of as home. In June 1999, surviving Kinder held their 60-year reunion in London. My father, still living in England, chaired the committee, which published a 184-page keepsake brochure to honor the occasion, and it is his introductory remarks, as published in the booklet, with which I will begin. While he speaks about the need to bear witness, his personal silence, like that of so many of his contemporaries, is striking. He wrote, and I'm quoting, "Faced with the daunting task of compiling the chronicle of the extinction of our nearest and dearest, I cannot help but think in gratitude that, quote, there but for the grace of God, go I," end quote. One would have thought that mass murders of Jews, like those that took place during riots in Cologne in 1069, or in Dresden on Shrove Tuesday 1349, when the Duke of Meissen, charging the Jews responsible for the plague, ordered that the city's Jews be burned alive, or in Berlin on July 15, 1510, when 38 Jews were burned at the stake, or in the wake of Martin Luther's rabble-rousing anti-Semitism that provoked the Braunschweig pogroms of 1543, that these were all part of medieval German history. One might be forgiven for considering that the ever-recurring blood libels that decimated so many of the Rhineland Jewish communities were little more than aberrations, minor footnotes to an otherwise distinguished history. But we, in our time, have been destined to bear witness to the greatest massacre in history, the crowning event of German civilization. For indeed, while the footnotes remain unchanged, the underlying text must be reread. Perhaps more than any other nation of the time, the pre-war Germans basked in the glow of Jewish achievement in all fields of human endeavor. In the sciences, where Jews provided 1/3 of all Nobel Prize winners. In medicine, where they contributed nearly half of all German laureates. In literature, philosophy, industry, and commerce. These figures assume an even more startling impact when one considers that there were only 500,000 Jews in a population of over 65 million Germans. Notwithstanding such achievement, Germans conceived and implemented what they termed the, quote, final solution, end quote, plunging the world into an orgy of savagery. The passage of time cannot alter the image so indelibly burned into our consciousness of the depth to which a seemingly cultured people could sink. For lack of another word to describe the indescribable, Elie Wiesel applied the term, quote, Holocaust to the event. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the Holocaust as, quote, a sacrifice of destruction by fire, end quote. For us, survivors of that great inferno, it implies a melancholy truth, beginning in the 1930s when we witnessed a tyranny unparalleled in human history. In facing the future, we must also face our past. We, the surviving Kinder, were spared the worst excesses of German inhumanity by the benevolence of the British government, the generosity of the British people, and the beneficence of the Anglo-Jewish community, when other nations stood idly by, witnessing the progress of the annihilation of our people. Today we must bear witness, through our own survival, our retention of Jewish morals, principles, and ideals, the survival of our parents, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, nephews, nieces, cousins, and all our other loved ones that have been achieved. These words, charging his aging fellow Kinder to bear witness, were published on June 15, 1999. On March 30th, 2008, I penned the following letter to my son Kiwi to be delivered to him during his forthcoming heritage trip to Poland. Hi Kiwi, Craig Lubner, an organizer of this heritage trip, sent us an email today offering parents of participants an opportunity to, quote, express their feelings about the meaning of such a trip and or to wish their son strength for the trip. That Mummy and I offer you strength goes without saying. It's ironic that Craig's request should find its way into our inbox today, the last of my year of Avelut for Sabra. He was born in Chemnitz, Germany, but both his parents and most of his family came from Tarnow, one of the places on your Polish itinerary. My mother's family also came from Poland, though I'm not sure from where. Neither of my parents spoke about their personal history, perhaps because both had come independently on the Kindertransport. Or, to put it more bluntly, they'd both been sent away from home by their parents. Only my maternal grandfather, who was incarcerated in Buchenwald for 6 years, survived the war. He was one of, quite literally, a handful who survived the camp experience. Like my parents, he also never spoke about his experiences, at least not during his waking hours. For a number of years, my brother Tony used to share bedroom with him. It was Tony's responsibility to wake him up from his frequent nightmares. As you know, Savta, Mummy's mother, also comes from Poland. She was born in the once bustling Jewish metropolis of Radom. As you know, she is the sole survivor of her entire family. And your brother Yoni is named after her brother Avram. The relatively unusual spelling of his Hebrew name reflects my feelings for the circumstances under which he died. But this letter is not intended to masquerade as a history lesson. Rather, I'm trying to stick to the mandate offered by Craig to express feelings about the meaning of your trip. For years, I'd avoided the topic of the Holocaust, hoping to spare you the details. But I will never forget that walk to shul about 5 years ago, when you argued passionately in support of turning the other cheek, forgive and move on, don't visit on the kids the sins of their fathers. The list of arguments you offered was extensive. And I, for the first time, recognized the mistake of my silence. The trip to Poland is one that I personally could not have made. I'm too emotional and perhaps too bitter to approach the reality rationally. But I think it is a necessary exercise for you. Perhaps you would experience a sense of what happened, what was lost. Perhaps, too, you'll be introduced to an understanding of who the perpetrators were. Kiwi's older sister Simone had been on a similar trip to Poland a few years earlier, and I sent her a copy of Kiwi's letter. Here is her reaction. Very powerful letter. I remember when I went and you were opposed. You didn't want to give money to the Polish airline or pay for any Polish food. It's interesting to see that you've changed your mind, and quite drastically. What do you think happened? I answered her. I realized I was wrong. Somehow, you and Yoni had acquired the sensitivity to understand what had happened in Poland, and why we could not just continue with business as usual with these murderers or their progeny. Kiwi did not have the same feelings. I suppose that growing up with survivors tarnished my innocence and germinated anger and bitterness without anyone actually saying anything directly. When you asked to go on the trip, I stupidly asserted a protective arm around you. I couldn't have gone on the trip because the reality was too intense. I did not want to expose you to what I assumed would be the focus of the heritage experience. It was, in my mind, a painful, fruitless exercise, preaching, as the saying goes, to the choir. But you proved me wrong. Your experience was positive. Acknowledging the dead, your focus was on the living. My favorite part of your album was the picture of you standing in the site of Safta's bunker, smiling at the camera. We won, you were saying. We survived after all. It still brings tears to my eyes as I contemplate whether we achieved only a Pyrrhic victory. I fear that that is all I could feel were I to be standing in the photo next to you. The sense of loss to me is overwhelming. That said, I failed to communicate any of this to Kiwi. That walk to shul I referenced in the letter really happened. I was devastated that something I felt was fundamental had completely passed Kiwi by. And why? Because I had never, not even once, brought up the subject of the Holocaust. He never had to grapple with the theological conflict that had plagued my parents and that I had somehow inherited. My objective was to protect him, and I'd paid the price. I resolved that Kiwi and, God willing, Yael will know the difference between the Crusaders and the Nazis in the perspective of Jewish history. While they can both laugh with Mel Brooks and Monty Python about the Spanish Inquisition, they can never become detached or indifferent about an experience which claimed the lives of family they should have known and loved. On behalf of our grandparents, uncles, aunts and cousins, and the little children of Chronim Livracha, I cannot allow Kiwi to forgive so easily. But more than that, I cannot allow him to forget. For him, the trip needs to be made. It is a journey that is long overdue. I'll let my father have the last word. In the final pages of the Kindertransport Journal, he pens a brief epilogue, and I quote, "There is no epilogue necessary or even possible to this saga of German barbarism. Its chronicle will go down in the annals of history as a poignant reminder of Germany's dialogue with the past, testimony to the depths a nation can sink to. Let us extol our triumph of survival and pay homage to our loved ones who perished among the 6 million martyrs. Their resistance was marked by abhorrence against their oppressors and retention of Jewish values whilst facing death, that being the only weapon left to them. We too must display the tenacity that merits being their successors, upholding the principles for which they died. That is our inheritance, our duty, and our destiny. This surely is the purpose of our survival."